Hello, my name is Kate Taylor and I'm the Landscape Coordinator for the Dawson Catchment Coordinating Association. We have recently completed several on-ground projects for 2023-24, working with various landholders across the Dawson Catchment. These projects have focused on increasing ground cover and plant diversity, enhancing soil water infiltration and improving soil health at their project sites. In this presentation, we will hear from Glen Landsberg and David and Meredith Barrett, who presented at our What's Happening Over the Fence event. They will discuss the project work completed at Mount Ox in Theodore, Queensland in January 2024. This is part one of Glen's presentation. Thank you for tuning in today.
So a little bit of my background. We used to have country further up to the west, semi-arid. It's all relative, but large properties out that way, and just a little bit under 500,000 acres. But it's all relative in the scale that is needed to make a living. It's a very dry region that I was from, but it was just so evident as a child growing up that you wait for so long to get some rain, and then when it did rain, you just watch a lot of water just race off and take the soil with it. And so there's certainly an early beginning there of really becoming very aware of making the most of the rain when it does come. So these days, we ended up going into town for kids' schooling, and I was bush pilot for a long time, doing a lot of mustering work for 20 odd years. So from the air, you get to see the landscape, a different perspective, of the aspect of the land, and seeing it from above. You see where the issues are. You see a lot of the erosion. It all looks a lot worse from the air. But it's from that, and then looking at a way to get into or be in a position to help people start to make a difference and restore landscapes. And I started working for NRMs 5 years ago. So really, a lot of what I'm looking at here today is other people's stories. And I'm just sharing other people's stories and different ways that people are doing amazing things. And landholders often sell themselves a little bit short, but there's some extraordinary work that I see all the time. And I get to share those stories, which is quite wonderful. And then I come home to my little hobby block and practice them. So productivity through landscape restoration, to me, I find that incredibly exciting. The potential is quite mind-blowing. And I look at what other people are doing, and I've also got the time now that I do a lot more research into the science behind why different things work. So if the slide works. Righto, so we're going to get off track a little bit, and I did this, Kate, last time too. We're going to jump overseas, and this is in the Middle East, and this is in Libya, but we would be forgiven for looking at this and thinking a bomb's gone off. It's that part of the world. But it's actually the result of a broken landscape. That's a river system that's caused a lot of flooding. And the important thing from this is it's a broken catchment above that. It's an incredibly dry landscape. And their water security that's their biggest issue as a nation, that they have very little water, and they're using aquifers that are going to run out very shortly. So they're in big trouble, and yet what rain they're getting is doing that amount of damage. So, we come back to Australia and we look at what's happening here, what are we doing here, and getting to see so much country, you see some beautiful little gems, even in very arid areas where you get to see what the landscape should look like, or what it probably did look like 200 years ago. And it's that observation. Observation is critically important. Whenever we're looking at our properties and looking for where potential is, it's looking at where is something working, and then, or it might be on your neighbours, or it might be in the district. And how do we return or get more productivity out of our landscapes? How do we take to the next level? So we see that in a lot of areas there used to be a lot more water storage, a lot more billabongs, ponds, and they play a massive role. But getting that water back into landscape is probably one of the early things that we have to focus on. I mean, it's never just one thing. We've got to get the fencing right, we've got to get the water right, and stock management. There's so many things that we can improve on. But water in the landscape's pretty well up there because that's what grows the grass and that's what we're relying on. So looking at those billabongs and ponds in the landscape, and this is just one property we were looking at, and because there was extra water going down from bare landscapes in the catchment, even though he had some really healthy billabongs and ponds that were in amazing condition, there was too much water coming down and it was starting to blow the ends out of his billabongs, and then it was starting to erode in the good grass, even on the well-grassed up flats, couldn't handle the amount of water that was coming down. And next thing you know, all the billabongs are joined up by an eroded gully. And we see that just everywhere. You know, a lot of gullies shouldn't be gullies at all, or creeks shouldn't even be creeks. They should just be grassy flats. And in this instance here, once we get down a little bit further, all the soil was gone and we're just down to bare rock. Quite shallow soils there. And there are still things we were doing there. We just went in and started putting the ends back in billabongs and slowing water down and trying to get some of the water out of that, or slow the flow of the water down that system. And you know, this is often the reality for so many systems, and we probably all see this everywhere. But this landholder here, he remembers when this was just a grassy flat. And you look at the thousands and thousands of tons of soil that are gone from here. And you know, you first look at that as, wow, that's an awful lot of water coming down there. But most floods now only get about a foot or so high in that. It's just incising deeper every time it rains. So they're often not as scary as what they first look. This is also opportunity. You know, if we were to go and buy more country, if we go further east where it's higher rainfall, we're going to pay more money for it. And yet, on all of our places, we have so much water going to waste that we can put back and add value to our landscapes. I just threw this in because this is my hometown, Charleville, and in the headwaters of this town is a gully just like the one that was in the previous slide. And it was in 1990, and we had a flood in the Warrego, but it was a 7-inch storm on what used to be a grassy flat coming down Bradley's Gully that hit the river at the same time as there was that run in the river, and it just overloaded the whole system and just took the town out pretty majorly. But we get to the point with those broken landscapes that often those 1 in 100-year floods suddenly become 1 in 20-year floods. They become a lot more often. And it's just relative, this photo, when we go a little bit further, it's just relative to what David and Meredith are doing. Now, a lot of country ends up getting locked into drought and flood cycles, and it's how do we recreate and maintain a healthy landscape? We've all seen photos of flood damage, and quite often we go from flood back to drought, and it's how do we break that cycle? So we get to this beautiful bit of country up at Theodore, and David and Meredith gave me a call and said they were interested in doing some landscape work on their property at Theodore. We've done a little bit down near Mitchell and on their other property. And so you come up here and you look at this and think, oh, wow, I mean, it's a spectacular bit of country. What needs doing? The property is called Mount Ox, and as you can see, it's a beautiful bit of country. There's just a short little video there. As you sweep around, you can see it's just every direction you look, it looks amazing. So David and Meredith, they gave me a lot and plan for the property, and I studied it up, had a bit of a look on the satellite image to get a bit of a feel for the place before I got there and know where it was, so that when I was looking at on the ground, I could look at satellite images on my phone and have a rough idea of where I was and what I was looking at. And it's a very big part of it that it's got to be tied in with what the landholders want to do. And certainly working with David was fantastic because he was a surveyor. So he's got a really good concept of landscapes and levels and what water is doing. And it was also really good because as we were designing things, I could just describe to David, or we could come up with a plan together, and then David could go and relay that to the machinery operator, and then I could just keep doing levels on other areas that David and I had talked about. And as far as when we're trying to create something, it definitely comes back to what the landholders would like to do. It's certainly not me going there and looking at what I think needs to be done. It's looking at what suits the landholders' management, what are their requirements, where do they see problems, and then just coming up with solutions together on how we can tackle that, or maybe point out other areas where they weren't aware that they had issues or where the issues were starting. So it's very much a landholders project. In this case here, we look at this little bit of country, and it really stood out when we got there that there were these little erosion features scattered through there. And wherever they were, as you can see in this photo here, all of the land, all of the grass around it is much shorter and it's all yellow. Even though there'd been a bit of rain around, everywhere else looked really green. The areas that had erosion were all like this. They all had yellow, dried out grass and these little erosion features. Some were small, some were big. So we were targeting those to try and get that drought resilience back. How can we do something about those? And quite often it was just simple little blocks on them and just flicking the water out somewhere safe into where there was some good grass that could manage the amount of water. Yes, and flood resilience, it's really the same thing. You know, we look at all of these sneaky little things and they just keep accumulating. And before you know it, they're starting to cut deeper and deeper. And once again, they're not often running full of water. They just keep incising deeper and become dangerous little things if you don't know they're there and you hit them on a bike. But it's an accumulative effect. So if we can just start to deaccumulate it, if that's such a word, just cutting little bits off, putting little blocks, and you know, quite often that is starting up higher where we can and getting a little bit of control on the water. We can get that back into our soils, back where it needs to be. When we've got those deep features like that, they're draining the soil to the depth of that erosion. So it's no wonder the grass is very dry around it because the subsoil moisture has been drained to the depth, and in that case, over 1 metre deep. So those grass roots are out of soil moisture now. Yes, and it's no wonder they're looking droughted. Listening with our eyes. I love going to places where people have tried things and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And often landholders don't want to, or they're a little bit embarrassed. You know, they've tried something and they might say, "Oh, we did this, but it didn't really work," and don't really want to have a look at it. But I love looking at those because very often they have worked or they're very close to working, and they might have just need a little bit of tweaking, or it just tells us so much about what we're dealing with. And in this case here, we can get a picture of how much water was coming down this flat system. And it was where someone had put a bank across this flat to try and remediate a little eroded gully. And when you go a little bit further up behind here, the whole flat is just all broken. It's starting to grass up. And the wonderful management that David and Meredith are doing, there's fantastic grass cover through their property. But there's still these little historical erosion features that they're trying to restore and get on top of. So in this case here, this little dam that had been put across an erosion feature had worked so well, it had collected an enormous amount of silt upstream from it and reshaped the flat. It had leveled the whole thing out. All of those little eroded gullies and washouts had leveled out again. But on its own, it had worked too well. It had silted up and then got to the point where the water was breaking over the top, and then it started a new gully. Now, the concept was spot on. Oh, we tweaked it a little bit, but we just went in and fixed that bank because it actually worked really well. But we just gave the assistance of doing some work upstream to take the pressure off that one so it wasn't carrying the full load on its own. There was just too much water and too much silt coming down and hitting that one feature on its own. So that's an important thing, the observation, really looking at our landscape, seeing what's happening and trying to ascertain what we can do, keeping an open mind. Quite often things do work really well. The environmental value of restored wetlands, and we're looking at that picture before, that gullies that wasn't just a grassy flat, and now it's that terrible eroded mini Grand Canyon. And if left untouched, it's just going to keep cutting down until it hits rock or something else stabilizes it. But that's actually opportunity. That's a massive amount of water that we can create something with, we can put back to work. So the second photo here is where we've turned features like this into wetlands. And this one here was one similar to that. It used to drain in a couple of hours, and now it takes weeks to drain. It drops all its silt out in days. The water goes clear, and the wildlife start to come back. This is a little video. I've just got to be quick on the pause button here. But the important thing of these days, landholders are constantly sending, and I think it's wonderful. They keep sending me in all these videos and photos of what they're doing now. And it's developing a fresh set of eyes to look at the landscape. It's getting out and looking at where are we losing our water. And this was just the fantastic thing behind this is this landholder was getting out in the rain to have a look at what was going wrong or where the water was going. And he just gets very descriptive on the patch of burrs he landed on. But it's that important thing that he's getting out and looking at where the water's going. He went to see, he had a wetland that he just knew wasn't working. So he went out after a rainstorm and he just hit a bad patch of silt and went over the handlebars and landed a patch of burrs. But this is what he came to have a look at. This is the important thing. Now, I hope you could all hear that, the audio there, but he was saying that there's a blue bush wetland there that was draining before it could fill. Now, you can see like the main erosion only just starts there, and it doesn't look all that big. It doesn't look like a lot of water. And yet, when we block that up, this is the wetland behind it. There's an earth wall in I don't know if you can see my mouse down here. Can you see my mouse? Kate, if you nod.
Yeah, we can see the mouse.
Yep.
We couldn't hear the audio, but thanks for saying what he was saying.
Okay. So yes, he was just saying he had a blue bush swamp and wetland there that just wasn't filling anymore. This is the size of that wetland. This is how much water was being lost down that. In this case, it was a bit of length to the contour that was put across the erosion feature, and then there was a timber bank just out of the dead timber. Mulga had died in the drought, and he made a timber weir along the side here, and that was to let the waters come back into the country below. So we weren't stopping the water or denying the country below getting any water. But the extraordinary area above that was getting a drink. Now, this same, when we're just looking at the scale of it, this same landholder back in 2019 or 2020, at the end of the drought, really bad drought out there, and he was just about to send 3,000 lambs off on agistment and 250 head of weaner cattle. And this was before we did this work here. It's another wetland. And he took me to show me this place that used to be a wetland, or was a wetland. He said it only fills once every 10 years. And when we stopped and thought about it, it was only in those once in every 10 years you get a really big rain event that would go in and fill it. So we drove around it and had a look, and there was just an erosion feature at the head of it that was diverting all of the small flows to another eroded gully system. All we had to do is put a little block on that erosion feature and send the water back at that wetland. And he had an 18 millimeter storm event, and it's high rainfall runoff country, a lot of tin roof country out there. But an 18 millimeter rainfall event flooded that wetland, and from that one flooding, those 3,000 lambs and those 250 weaner cattle then had feed to stay on the place. He didn't have to send them on agistment. That's how big that wetland was and how productive. In 2 years, he had 18 fills into that wetland. So that same bloke, the significance of drought proofing and drought resilience and flood resilience. So for him, he was allowing 100 grand a year on drought feed, buying cottonseed, buying hay. He now puts that 100,000 every year into restoring landscapes, looking for those features that are where the land's not working, restoring wetlands. And this was just another one that did later on. But that's the sort of productivity that he's getting back into that landscape. There's a lot of little eroded gullies that we just take for granted, but they shouldn't be there. So we're coming back to Mount Ox. Now, okay, once we're getting into this Theodore country, we're looking at a different scale. We don't have the big flat areas and everything's a bit smaller, but it rains more regularly. So we might wait for a year out here to get rain on these big flat areas. Here, rain is a lot more regular. Now, this is where David and Meredith were fantastic because they're so observant. They already had in their minds that this was a wetland here, and this was the bottom end of it, and this was where it was broken. This is the little drainage feature. And you can see it's not that much different to the size of that drainage feature in that last image out near Thargomindah. Now, we can look at those trees there, and we can see the roots on those trees. In the life of those trees there, the soil used to be flat across here. We can see by where those roots are that they used to be under the soil. So this erosion's only a recent feature. It might be 30, 40 years old. I mean, this tree over here is not that old. So, even if it's 60 years old, but probably isn't. So we know that these shouldn't be here. They're not natural. It's not a creek. It's not a gully. It's an erosion feature. And this was another one here, exactly the same thing. And all we did, this was when I went back just the other day, Billy, the contractor, David just got him to put that little bank across it. Now, sometimes that's easy, sometimes it isn't. Bearing in mind, you've got to have a safe place for that water to bywash then. If we're going to try things like this, we've got to be thinking, where is that water going to go? We've got a couple of safety features. We've got the fact that it is going to dam up a little bit. If we think we're going to dam too much, or if we're going to drown country or blocking water we shouldn't be blocking, we mostly want to be letting the water flow through, but just slow it down. We do a lot of banks like this where we just put a bit of PVC through it and it can just drain slowly. There are other things that we can do too. We can be aware that where the water flows around the edges, we want to pick a nice, well-grassed, stable area, or we can put it into some spreader channels. So spillways and bywashes, this is what we're also looking, and this was coming off that last wetland. So we're looking at, okay, it's a little bit fragile below that wetland. It's also a little bit damaged. We need to try and get some of the water out of the area and let it flow back in slowly over a different stage. So all water's not coming down at once. So that wetland was up here somewhere. And this is, David, I can't remember, is that a kilometre long or so, this wetland? Sorry, this bywash? Could be. Yeah, I think it was about a kilometre long. You there, David?
Yeah, no, it would be at least a kilometre long.
Yes, okay. So what we were doing, this is the downhill side. We ran this drain into where the biowash was coming from, that little dam. And at the start of it, we had a little diversion bank where we had and a little bit of fall with the bank on the bottom side. And the sump's the most important part. And and I don't want to get lost on designs. This is just one thing that we tried here. There's so many different ways we can do things. It's whatever works in. But once we got out to where it was safe, we put the dirt on the top side of our drain. And it's basically not much more than just a V drain with a grader. Where we got to where it was safe to let the water out, we put the dirt on the top side. And now when this sump's full, and it's a bit over a foot deep the whole way along it, it'll just trickle out just ever so gently. Because it's so long, it might only be half a centimetre, if that, just trickling out over the bank and through the grass. So we've taken that damaging impact out of it. And you can send a lot of water down something like this and make it safe. And it'll just run back down and slowly head back towards the creek. Just the other day when I was there, it still hasn't rained, unfortunately. But this is just what it looks like after it's settled down a little bit. So getting serious, sometimes we'll take that to a much greater extent. Drowning out, this is just another photo out here where we put in a fresh, larger dam across an erosion feature and then another spreader channel running off it. There are all different ways that we can make it. And it really often comes back to what does the landholder want to create? What works for them?